That's a loaded question, Austin. I appreciate that question, though, because I think my job as the manager of a public utility district is to have a reliable, cost-effective, affordable solution for my customers. When they go home at night, they shouldn't have to worry about whether they can plug their car in or turn their lights on or their air conditioner, right? If I'm doing my job right.
Welcome back to DAM, the official podcast of Northwest Hydropower. I'm your host, Austin Rohr, and I manage all things communications here at Northwest River Partners. One of the things that I love about this podcast is that I get the opportunity to talk to interesting people about fascinating topics. And today's guest is no exception. Gary Ivory, thanks for making some time for the pod.
Yeah, Austin, thanks for inviting me and glad to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're in for a really fun one today. For those that don't know, tell me a little bit about Douglas PUD and also your role there.
Yeah, so Douglas County Public Utility District is a small public utility located in central Washington. We serve most of Douglas County with power and internet services. We also have a dam on the Columbia River called the Wells Dam. Wells Dam is located up by between Chelan and Pateros on the Columbia River. It has an 840 megawatt capacity, and we're very proud and happy to be a hydropower producer in Washington State. We also have hatcheries at the dam, both at the dam and up the Methow River. So that's a pretty brief overview of what Douglas County PUD does.
Great. Yeah, and we'll definitely be getting into that a little bit more. And then as far as kind of your background there, I mean, how did you end up with Douglas and how did you end up in the utility space?
Yeah, I have been general manager since 2017, Austin. I came up through in the utility through the accounting ranks. I was a deputy auditor and then the auditor and treasurer here at the district. So I've been in charge of virtually all the accounting aspects of the district and the customer service aspects. Also ran the broadband division for a little while here at Douglas PUD while it was expanding significantly, and then came along to be offered the job as manager in 2017, and it's been great to be the manager of a small utility. We have about 20,000 customers here, and most of our service territory is pretty rural, and it's a beautiful place to live. So I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. It is truly a beautiful area. Now, I want to set the scene a little bit too. So, Douglas is one of these what we know as a mid-sea PUD, and you touched on some of your hydropower, your hatcheries, and broadband service. All these different things that are provided through the utility. Could you elaborate on what that mid-sea sort of term is for people that aren't in the know, and kind of what separates you guys a little bit from some of the other regions utilities?
Sure. The Mid-Sea is referred to as the Mid-Columbia because we are right on the midstream of the Columbia River. There are five dams on the Mid-Columbia portion of the Columbia River that are non-federal dams, and those dams are operated by local public utility districts. So Douglas PUD operates a dam that's below Grand Coulee and Chief Joseph Dam. It's the first non-federal dam on the Columbia River in the United States. Next down the river are the Rocky Reach and Rock Island projects operated by Chelan PUD. And then you've got Wanapum and Priest down below Chelan PUD and Grant County that are operated by Grant County PUD. And so those five dams are typically referred to as the mid-seas.
Yeah, yeah. No, that I think that sets the scene quite well for people that aren't as familiar with that. And in terms of talking about those hydropower facilities that you touched on, Douglas being not just an energy provider but also a producer, how did the utility come into taking on that role?
Well, years ago, our commissioners at a small public utility district realized that a lot of the space on the Columbia River was being allocated to different dams, and they decided to jump into the hydropower industry. And being a small county in central Washington, they didn't have a lot of resources, and so they partnered with larger companies like Avista and Puget Sound Energy and Portland General Electric to back bonds for the construction of a dam on the Columbia River. And Douglas PUD for some time, for a few decades, didn't even take power from our own dam. We were a Bonneville Power customer, and our dam produced power that was more expensive than Bonneville at the time. And so we didn't even take power from our own dam for quite some time. Eventually, the calculus and the math changed, and it became more advantageous for us to start using power from our dam. And so we started using power from Wells Dam. The contracts with a lot of those uh, original partners lasted for 50 or 60 years. They just terminated in 2018, actually. And so now Douglas PUD is pretty much the sole owner and operator of Wells Dam. We also have a good partnership with Okanagan PUD, who controls about 10% of the output of Wells Dam right now, and the Colville Tribes has another allocation of about 5.5% of Wells Dam output.
Mm. And that too plays into something that I think is worth bringing up about Douglas, which is that you guys have tremendously low rates. And it's one of the things that people love about the area and businesses love about the area. And as I understand it, that has a lot to do with that hydropower investment that you made years ago.
We do have among the lowest rates in the country. We're really fortunate to have those low rates. Along with that comes a lot of responsibility and a lot of risk for our customers, because our only source of generation is one hydroelectric dam on the Columbia River. If we ever lost that resource, it would be a pretty significant blow to our county. Um,
Mm.
but we are lucky to have very low rates because of that hydropower facility.
Right, right. And then in terms of being able to do, say, a broadband project or the hatcheries or anything like that, how does that tie into um, having access to that facility and having your own generation as well?
Yeah, so broadband came about 20 years ago. We started building more fiber optic communication capabilities out to the dam. Our East Wenatchee headquarters is about 50 miles from the dam, and we had to have pretty robust communication between our administrative buildings and the dam. So we built fiber optics all the way up the river to the dam. Part of that process also built out to substations along the way. Pretty soon we realized, wow, we have this tremendous broadband capability within the PUD, but our county does not have access to that. And at the time, 20 years ago, everybody just had dial-up. They didn't have high-speed internet. But we started offering that to a few customers even before PUDs had the authority to sell broadband, and it was a hit. And ever since then, we've been building out broadband in Douglas County. We're almost done with our broadband build out. Actually, we have probably another year of build out, and then we will have reached you know most corners of the county. We started in the most rural areas, but this having the dam really allowed us to build broadband out to our county. And then the hatcheries, because we have a dam on the Columbia River, we have habitat conservation plans that specify um, that we will have no impact on the Columbia River, on the fish in the Columbia River. So we do studies, we determine how many fish that we impact based on the operations of our hydro project, and our hatcheries produce fish to compensate for the fish that we do harm in the Columbia River. Our dam has the best fish passage on the Columbia River. I would say among the best. We're typically more than 95% or better passage at our dam.
Yeah, I mean those numbers are, some people might say, oh, well, why can't you get to 99 or 100? But if you think about, how that data is collected and also the, just general challenges with getting every single fish through, yeah, those numbers are really outstanding. And, speaking a little bit more personally, as opposed to kind of being the voice of the audience, so to speak, I know that, a lot of work has been done to achieve that as well. And that sort of work and the technology that's been developed to allow that survival rate, I mean, that's a really tremendous project that now, kind of leads an example for other facilities that they're trying to implement fish passage with.
Yeah, thanks. We're really proud of our environmental record here at Douglas County PUD. Being the last dam with fish passage on the Columbia River brings some pretty significant responsibilities with it. And we would really rather have natural production fish. So we have a lot of programs out in the stream beds of the Methow and up into Canada, even related to some of the sockeye passage. But we're really proud of our environmental record. We're going to continue to make progress there and improve the populations that are out there.
So switching gears a little bit here, you did mention that you essentially have sort of hydropower as your main source of generation for the utility. And one of the reasons that we want to talk with you today is that we want to get a better grasp of where you're headed next and how the utility is looking to expand their energy portfolio and invest in these valuable resources for the grid. And as I come to understand it, one of those investments is in sort of the other hydro, which would be hydrogen. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. In 2019, Douglas PUD went to the legislature in Washington state and asked to have authority to produce and sell hydrogen. And since 2019, the district has been engaged in a process to develop a plant that would develop hydrogen. And we really, we're a power company. We need to get used to handling storage of energy. And so hydrogen is our really a big first foray into energy storage. Um, we are constructing a plant that will have the capability to do up to 80 megawatts of hydrogen production if we so choose to expand it to that level. So far, we've been authorized by our commissioners to do first 5 megawatts and now 10 megawatts. We've actually announced a second phase to go up to 10 megawatts of hydrogen production. We think that hydrogen production will really complement what we do with our hydro facility. Our hydro facility is operated to balance the grid. And as we balance the grid, we're turning that hydro facility on and off all the time. We're moving the wicket gates and the blades on those units around, dumping more energy or dumping more water to produce more energy. And that all has maintenance and creates maintenance and wear and tear on assets. So one of our goals is to smooth out some of the signals that we're sending to our hydroelectric project to balance the grid. And if we can send them through this hydrogen plant, that hydrogen's produced through a process that doesn't take any mechanical where it doesn't impact machines in a wear and tear manner. And so I think we can produce some hydrogen and still create some big efficiencies for our hydroelectric operations. So that's our goal anyway, and we're going to see if that works for us. There's a high demand for hydrogen in the Pacific Northwest, and so we're excited to be involved in this new burgeoning industry in the Pacific Northwest.
There's definitely seems to be an appetite for this. And the an interesting theme that's sort of developed in these early episodes of this podcast and won't necessarily be the theme that we always run on, but at least the guests that we've talked to so far, we've had some really good conversations with folks leading up to this about versions of energy storage. And we've had a conversation with Eric Steinley from Ride Development, who talked about pump storage. And then, talking to you today about hydrogen, there's also, the interest in batteries as well. I guess the question that I really have for you, and it's not so much my own question, is more of a question of what I assume someone might ask listening to this. What is the reason why you might go with hydrogen as opposed to some of the other forms of energy storage?
Well, I think we're dealing with larger volumes of energy at Douglas PUD than typical battery storage provided at the time that we set out to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. Batteries are really good for short duration storage, this 1 to 4 hour range right now. I think that technologies are going to rapidly develop and those battery storage metrics will start to look a lot better over time. But in the hydropower industry, we need to be able to store larger volumes of energy and we need to be able to store it for a larger timeline. We need to be able to shift it maybe even into different seasons or different weeks or periods of time. And so that's what interests us a little bit more about hydrogen than just this instantaneous battery storage. We need this longer duration storage and higher volumes of storage also.
That makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Um, I might be sabotaging my own future questions as we get through this, but one thing that also comes to mind for me is the idea of sort of getting a grasp for what hydrogen means. And the average person might say, well, sure, I can point to it on a periodic table, or I understand hydrogen as being, a molecule you'd find in, say, water, like H2O. But as far as hydrogen being a way of generating or storing energy, could you maybe explain at a really basic level kind of what that process looks like? And then, we might get into a little bit more of the specifics as we move on here.
Sure. Yeah. So the process that we're going to go through to produce hydrogen, 80% of the input is electricity and the input costs. And so we have an electrolyzer that we'll put pure water into, and we'll induce a positive and a negative charge. We'll induce energy into that water, and there's a membrane in there that will actually separate the hydrogen from the oxygen. And as it gets separated by that membrane, electrons are attached to those hydrogen molecules, and then we're able to capture the hydrogen molecules and store them in a compressed gas form. A lot of people are asking me, well, are you going to take that hydrogen now that it's been stored in this compressed form and turn it back into power? And my answer has been, it's too expensive right now.
Mm-hmm.
We look forward to a time when we can turn it back into power, but right now we're going to take our electrons that are our green electrons that are produced at our hydropower facility, and we're going to produce hydrogen molecules that we can compress. We can compress this gas, we can store it, and we can sell the gas. So for us, it's this capability to produce something new. And most utilities don't really have a load that they can control, Austin. We're sort of subject to reacting to our customers. When they need power, we react to their needs. This will give us a pretty large plant that we can actually turn on and off when we need to, when it makes sense for us. And the output of that plant is hydrogen, a gas that we can sell for now.
That makes a lot of sense. And you also touched on too I believe it was the sort of green aspect of it. As I've come to understand it, there are sort of different forms of hydrogen, and they are often described with these different colors, green or blue, things of that nature. So, if you could maybe explain what type of hydrogen that you're looking into, or Douglas is looking into, and why you've selected that choice.
Sure, I think they call it the rainbow of hydrogen sometimes. There's pink, green, and blue, and all these different colors, brown. I think 90% of the hydrogen produced right now is produced through a process of steam reformation. And basically take natural gas and they break out the hydrogen from natural gas. Well, that's a carbon emitting process. And so Douglas PD using the hydroelectricity from our dam, a renewable energy, and using the process that we're going to use to create hydrogen, electrolysis, is producing what's called a green molecule of hydrogen. And green molecules of hydrogen, you know, have a premium attached to them, just like green energy. They're not produced through a carbon-based process. It's produced through a completely renewable green process. And so we're very proud of that process, and that fuel that's going to be created is then carbon neutral and can be used in cars. It can be used in industrial processes. Hydrogen's used in a lot of different ways across the world and across the nation.
Right, right. And it also makes sense a little bit too that, similarly to how Douglas came to be a hydropower generator, that as that landscape changes, it sort of future proofs, or gives you the ability to have options down the road as the landscape changes with energy overall, that you've made the investment now essentially. So I think even as you mentioned, there might be some cost barriers right now to where it changes maybe how you manage that hydrogen production, but down the line that could certainly shift.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, we could use some of the wind energy that's in our portfolio to produce hydrogen, or we could buy solar power. We could build a solar farm and use that to create green hydrogen also. It allows us a lot of flexibility in our energy portfolio. And then you're right, down the line, we are going to be testing some backup power sources for hydrogen. So some of our substation equipment will have fuel cell capabilities where as backup power for those substations, we'll use hydrogen for those backup power sources. So we're going to start experimenting with it right away.
So another thing that you touched on too is sort of this concept that I assume people will become more familiar with as they continue to listen to episodes of the podcast here, that you are in a bit of a reactive situation, being the energy provider. And on the previous episode that we just did, I spoke with Rick Dunn from Benton PUD, and we spent a lot of time talking about our region's grid reliability challenges. So when you look at the role hydrogen could play in helping to address some of those challenges, I think you've touched on them quite a bit, but maybe you could spend just a little more time talking about how hydrogen could be leveraged to, specifically address some of those concerns when you're talking about needing to be able to be reactive and respond to the demands that you have as the utility.
Sure. Yeah. We could talk for hours on this, and I'd like to listen to your other podcasts on that too. That sounds like an interesting topic. But we are, as power generators, we are reactive to the loads that are out there. When people wake up in the morning and turn on their coffee pots and jump in the shower, we start turning on generators. We ramp everything up. Well, then during the daytime, when the sun is shining, there's a whole bunch of solar power that's produced on the grid. And so that is starting to drive this belly of the duck curve down, right? That everybody's talking about now. And then in the evening, when the solar starts to taper off and everybody's going home and air conditioners are being fired up, we have this big ramp that has to take place with all these different energy generating sources, right? To control the grid and make sure the grid is reliable. And that time shifting of energy that we spoke about a little bit earlier is really what we're after, right? We can take and produce hydrogen maybe during the day when there's a whole bunch of solar production out there, or during times of high flow on the river when there's not a lot of electricity demand. We can produce hydrogen with that instead of wasting it. So it's really grabbing all these periods of energy waste that we might have and storing them so that we can use them during a period of time when we need to focus on reliability on the grid, or we need to generate more power. And so I think that's the future of hydrogen for us as a utility, and maybe for the industry potentially too, if we can do this right.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And something else there, you talk about the future of this technology. It sounds like the ball's already rolling pretty well, but what timeline do you sort of anticipate that we're looking at for these technologies to be implemented and really start to become a major factor in our overall sort of grid portfolio?
Well, we all certainly know about the aggressive clean energy transformation that's going on in Washington State right now. Utilities have to be ready by date certain now to produce clean energy, and so we have to be ready, right, by 2030 and 2045. Those are pretty critical dates. Those dates are coming pretty fast in terms of how utilities typically operate and invest in assets. It takes us a long time to develop, whether it's transmission lines or generating assets, and decide on those investments and what type of investments those might be. So this program for us is really a pilot project. If the pilot turns out to work and be functional, we plan to add layers onto this pilot project that may include some kind of generation down the road, may include more storage of energy. It sort of opens up a line of possibilities for us. But I view those changes coming over the next decade or more, Austin. I don't think they're going to happen instantaneously. I think people would like things to happen faster, but there needs to be a period of transition here where we can determine what type of solutions work best. There really aren't any great solutions out there right now. Batteries are great. They have their own environmental impacts. There's just not a lot of storage out there, and we need to develop and work on these storage projects as much as we can.
Your words really echo the sentiment of some of the other people I've spoken to on the topic, and it does really sound like this is going to be a bit of a period of experimentation and development and really seeing what sticks. And it's interesting to talk about this topic today in the context of some of the other things that I have gotten to talk about on the podcast, because there are so many different technologies available, and many of them are relatively new, and I wouldn't consider them untested, but perhaps we're not sure quite what is going to fill the role right. But the interesting thing is that it does seem to me that one of the things that'll play to our advantage is having sort of a diversity there, that it's not going to be all about every single person using the same technology in the same scenario, but in sort of the same way that our hydropower system isn't made up of the exact same type of dams. There's benefits to having each of these storage and generation facilities being somewhat unique and specialized to the area.
Yeah, that's well said, Austin. This diversity is really required to make the grid stable, to stabilize the grid. So I agree with you.
And then one other question that comes to mind too, for the person listening who is in, whether they're in Douglas's community, or whether they are just a regular person here in the Northwest who receives energy through a public utility, what might those people expect to see in terms of how this would impact their daily lives as we make sort of these different changes? And would there be things that they would see change as far as implementing more of this storage technology through hydrogen, for example, and things like that, or because this really is not meant to be a setup question, right? Um, is it a case of, hey, they might not see any changes at all, and that's for the better, that they continue to see their power rates remain relatively low and life relatively the same, and have all the stability and the reliability that they're used to?
That's a loaded question, Austin. I appreciate that question, though, because I think my job as the manager of a public utility district is to have a reliable, cost-effective, affordable solution for my customers. When they go home at night, they shouldn't have to worry about whether they can plug their car in or turn their lights on or their air conditioner, right? If I'm doing my job right, customers need to have confidence in the power system that we've created here in the United States. I think, we're a first world country. First world countries have good, reliable power systems. It's very important. And so we as power managers and legislators even have to do our job correctly. It's easy to sort of cast aspersions on what's going on and maybe down in California or other areas of the country that are trying to be green and green up their grids. It's important to have good, clean energy. I think we've done that very well here in the Pacific Northwest. My goal as a utility manager would be to not have a lot of impact to our customers, and create this new fuel that will qualify under our state's clean energy transition goals. And if I can create an energy and stabilize their fuel costs and their energy costs, I think I'm doing my job right. And so that's a big reason that we've chosen to do hydrogen. We're lucky to have a hydropower dam on the Columbia River as the source of all this clean energy. I think in other areas of the country, though, you can kind of look around and see how some of the transition has impacted them, and it could potentially increase costs. I don't think that consumers are going to be immune to some kind of cost increases, because we're going to have to figure out how to do these storage programs and processes, how to create these new generation assets, and they're gonna cost us money to do that, and those costs will eventually be passed on to customers. But
Mm-hmm.
stability in those cost increases is very important, part of the process too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think the thing that is important to communicate through this discussion is that ultimately we we have such a strong appetite, especially here in the Northwest, for these transitions, but there is something to be said with doing it in a patient and seamless manner so that you don't end up seeing those impacts, and you don't end up seeing kind of the shock of moving too quickly, right? So, it's I think it's important for people to hear that, and it's important for people to hear that from you, right? I mean, ultimately, um, that's there's something to be said for someone in your position to make that case. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I'm kind of winding down here on my end as far as the some of the questions I had for you today goes, and I really appreciate your time here. As far as some parting words that you might like to leave our audience with regarding today's discussion, is there anything that you would like people to kind of have as a take home, or some information to chew on at the end of this podcast, whether it's about the hydropower project or the hydrogen or the integration of the two technologies, or anything like that?
Well, Austin, I think you really just touched on it there with your I think you used patience. You said the word patience, and I think we have people that are driving really hard and really fast toward a clean, zero carbon world, and we support that. I think we're there. We're with folks on that transition. We know that it needs to happen. We're driving toward that, but we also need to have this balance of a grid that's resilient, that's affordable, that's reliable. And so if we can just have a little bit of patience, I think I see the pieces and parts of the future of the electric industry coming together. You know, part of that is hydrogen storage, part of that might be more solar, more battery storage, but a lot of the, you know, maybe it's nuclear also. Part of that is nuclear that Grant County PUD is after, but there needs to be a little bit of patience on the part of folks so that we can put all these assets into place. We can make the right investment decisions for our customers into the future. If we rush this too much, we'll end up breaking things and tearing things down rather than building things up. So that patience that you mentioned before is key.
Absolutely, I think that's really well said as well. You know, there are pluses and minuses to everything, right? So if we can avoid tearing down what we've worked really hard to build up over the last, you know, decades, and even if you look at the region and its history as a whole, you know, that really the last century, it's probably worth worth doing that. Um, so I have one last thing for you, and it's a something that I kind of spring on every one of my guests, but I think it's good to kind of throw it out there without a whole lot of prep because you get a more honest answer that way. So in order for people to maybe get a little bit of a better sense of who you are as opposed to, you know, some of the topics and discussions that we have here, I like to ask everybody, regardless of energy, regardless of hydro, regardless of, you know, talking about really the utility topics, if you could just give everyone maybe a simple word of advice as we close this one out. And, you know, it could really be, like I said, about anything, but just something that you think is a valuable piece of advice to share with the audience and leave people with something good to think on.
Yeah, you know, we we focus so much on the negative parts and pieces in the world sometimes. I think it's easy for us to focus on negative things as human beings, but we really need to take a step back once in a while and look at all the positive things that are really happening in the world today and in the United States of America, where we have a free country, where we're not, you know, being bombed by Russian bombs. Our electric grid is, you know, up, it's stable. We have a good, vibrant, healthy economy. We have so many positive, good things to look at when I look out over the history of this country and the history of our state and the region. We've created these beautiful electric assets that have served us so well for generations and generations. And my message is just, you know, let's have some patience and let's enjoy the good things that we do have, the positive things that we do have. Try to work together to come to some good decisions on the path forward for the utility industry and also just life in general. You know, enjoy each other and enjoy the journey. So that's my message.
I love it. I love it. And I think that after talking to you today, there's a lot more positive to come as well. So there's great things on the horizon and great things to look forward to. And that's a pretty exciting and pretty positive note to close out on.
Thanks for having me, Austin. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate the time, and I think we had a great discussion today. And I look forward to people getting to learn a lot more about hydrogen after this one. So yeah, thank you. Thank you sincerely for making the time.
Thanks. Looking forward to doing it again sometime.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you back. All right. I am just now putting the finishing touches on this episode, and listening back, it really put a smile on my face. It might have been that it was the perfect blend of relevant and interesting information about dams, hydrogen, broadband, you name it. It also could have been that it was just the positive conclusion Gary left us with that made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Either way, I enjoyed this one a lot. But the real question is, did you enjoy the podcast? What about the previous 3? Well, you can let us know by leaving a rating and or review on the platform you're listening on. Of course, we'd appreciate lots of praise as that helps us grow our audience, but we also encourage your honest and transparent feedback, whatever it may be. However, if you do enjoy the podcast, don't be stingy with the 5 stars. Please, we'd love it. Okay, I think that's going to do it. Who knows? The weekend is almost here for me, and if you're listening on the day this came out, it is for you too. I always put my guests on the spot for some advice, so here's my own unsolicited on-the-spot take, just for you. Get out of here, go enjoy your time, and get some fresh air wherever you are, rain or shine. This podcast, and whatever else you've got going on your phone there, I promise you it will still be there when you get back. In fact, you can count on new episodes of Damn to arrive every other Friday, so until 2 weeks from now, see ya!